Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Software of Excellence NHS Triage Assessments in Exact webinar. Today, we're going to have a look at how the triage forms in Exact actually work for you. They are a replacement or an addition to the Compass forms. So if you have any questions, if you'd like to ask those via the chat function, we've got colleagues on hand ready to answer any questions that are asked. If we do see a common theme appearing, we may try and answer this directly on air. But if you want to type your questions as we go through the presentation, that will be fine. So the first thing that I want to show you is actually nothing to do with triage. It's to do with updating your fees. As you know, the fee increase in April was actually postponed because of COVID. So the fee increase is taking place from the 14th of December. So you actually need to go in and update your fees. And you can do this by going into Exact and going to File, Payors, select the NHS here, and then go to Band Setup. Make sure that when you put the date in, when you click on New Date, that the date you enter is the 14th of the 12th, 2020. If you put the 1st of the 4th, 2021, then your fees will not start to be implemented until the 1st of the 4th, 2021. And it's very, very difficult to actually undo that once you've done it already. So just make sure that you put the right date in, which is the effective date, which is the 14th of the 12th, 2020. Okay, so now we're going to start looking at the triage forms in Exact. So I just want to tell you that it's not mandatory, excuse me, not mandatory for you to use the triage forms in Exact. You can, should you wish to, still submit your forms through Compass. We put it into the PMS at the request of the NHS BSA, and the reason that we've done this and the reason that they've asked us to do this is so that it's not doubling your workload. So the version of the software that you actually need in Exact is version 13.250, and we're looking at PF2. That's the version that you should be looking at. If you're on automatic updates and they're already switched on, you should be aware of what ring you're on. If you're not, I'll show you in a second how to find out what ring you're on. If you're on rings 5 or 6, the upgrade doesn't take place until approximately 3 weeks after general release. But if you want the build and you are on ring 5 or 6, you can obviously manually get that by going into the portal and downloading the version. If you're on Soul Health, which is our SQL platform, it will be at least version 3.28, but currently we have no release date for this. So if I just go into Exact again and show you where you can find your ring, if you go to Help and About, you'll see here that it actually tells you what ring you're in, and it will also tell you the day that your schedule is, you're scheduled for your auto updates. And you will automatically get your updates if you are on any of the rings. But as I said, if you want to get your update sooner, if you're on ring 5 or 6, then you can do that by downloading it from the portal here. Okay, let's go back. So when do I use the triage service? So in Exact, there are 2 places where you can actually do your triage from. And there is a new service in the system which is called Triage. And you don't need to do a triage form for routine appointments. If you book somebody in for a routine dental checkup, they don't need to have a triage form. If you are doing an orthodontic course of treatment and the patient has a pre-arranged scheduled orthodontic appointment, which they subsequently fail to attend, you do not need to do a triage form. The form should be used when a patient has been given remote advice, either by a dentist or a dental care professional within your organisation. When an NHS patient is referred to a UDC for treatment after being assessed by the dentist or the dental care professional, and if an NHS patient fails to attend a face-to-face appointment made following remote advice given by the dentist or DCP. So it's important that you actually do an initial triage for your patients as soon as you get on the telephone to that patient to give them any advice. And the reason for this is that if you do arrange a face-to-face appointment following up on the initial triage, you are actually able to say if that patient fails to attend that particular appointment. This is important because obviously the triaging, the initial triaging, goes towards your activity that is currently being monitored by the NHS BSA. So it is important that you do your initial assessment. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to show you how to do an initial assessment for a patient. So if I go into Exact, so on my appointment book, I've got 3 patients in here. And if I go to my Arrivals tab down the bottom here, what you will see, if I just move these over a bit, is that we have a little icon on here for triage. Now, what I'm going to do, because it's easier to see on the list appointments screen, I'm going to go into the Arrivals tab on the list appointments screen. So what we can see here is that we've got 2 black triage symbols and we have a green one. The green one indicates to me that the patient has already had an initial triage. So from here, I can do my triage and it will then reflect back onto the patient's chart screen. However, we suggest that you actually do your charting from the patient's chart screen. So if the patient is marked as in on the appointment book, as they normally would be, you will see your patient arrive at the door. Move your patient into the chair how you normally would, because this will actually time how long you're on the telephone to your patient. When you go into your chart screen, the triage assessment code, I've actually got it at the top of my favourites list. If you can't find the triage assessment code at the top of your favourites list, if you go into the all category and scroll to the very bottom of the all category, so go right the way down to the very bottom of the all category. Sorry, there we are. And you will see, sorry, I've gone right to the very bottom of it. Let me just untick that. There we go. You will see your code at the bottom there, triage assessment. If you want to put it into a category, you can simply click on the edit button here and then load it into wherever you want to see it. So I've put mine into my favourites and my urgent treatment list. So if I go back to my favourites here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to chart my triage here. So it will generate an FP17 for the patient. If the patient pays for treatment, then obviously none of this is filled out. But if they don't pay for treatment, that is also fine. Click OK, and you'll notice that the triage assessment comes on here. Now, you cannot add anything else to this, to this treatment plan. You can't add any notes or anything like a banded treatment to this because it will cause a rejection. So if you do want to add notes, double click onto it and you can write your clinical notes here. Alternatively, if you want to use the auto note function, write your auto note in here and send it straight into the history. When you've done your telephone triage, when you have completed it and you have put the telephone down to the patient, tick the box and it will then tell you that required triage data is missing and ask you if you want to enter that now. If you say yes, it will open this triage form here for you. Excuse me. So you'll see initial triage, the date of the initial triage, and the time that the triage ended. And that corresponds with exactly the time that I've double clicked onto that. The patient status group is the patient shielding? Is the patient at increased risk of illness from COVID-19? Do they have a possible or confirmed COVID-19 patient or household member? That would also cover if they were currently waiting for test results. Other, so is there another reason why you can't have them in the practice at the moment? And patient is COVID symptom free at present. So it may be that the patient is COVID symptom free, but you are just doing a telephone triage with that patient to see whether or not they do need to come into the practice, and obviously that helps to minimize risks for everybody. So I'm going to say that my patient is possibly at increased risk. It then asks you what you've actually done during this triage call. Was it completed by a dental care professional? So if it's somebody other than the providing dentist, was it completed by a dental care professional? Was the triage carried out by video? So was it just a telephone call, or was it a video conferencing call that went through? Did you give advice to the patient? And did you advise them about appropriate analgesics? So if they're in pain, did you tell them to take appropriate analgesics? Did you offer them a remote prescription for analgesics? Or did you give them a remote prescription for antibiotics? Is a follow-up call required? So are you going to have to make a follow-up call to that patient to check on them? Or have you advised them to contact you if the symptoms worsen? If after you've gone through these, you actually decide that the patient does require to be seen, and you, for whatever reason, aren't able to see them, and you refer them to a UDC, you can actually say why you're referring them here. So, are you referring them because they've got a life-threatening emergency? Do they have a swelling that is closing off their airway? Trauma, have they been hit by something that's caused trauma to their teeth or their face? Do they have an orofacial swelling? Do they have post-extraction bleeding? So have they got bleeding that is prolonged after an extraction? Dental conditions resulting in systemic illness, severe dental or facial pain, fractured teeth with pulp exposure, dental and soft tissue infections, suspected oral cancer, or orodental conditions worsening symptomatic. Okay, all of these have been defined by the NHS BSA, so the same as what is on Compass. So I'm going to say that it's not applicable that I'm saying to this patient go to a UDC, because I've given them advice, I've issued a remote prescription for antibiotics, and I've also advised them to take analgesics. I'm not advising the patient to call back. Sorry, I am advising the patient to call back if their symptoms worsen. So I'm not booking a follow-up call. I'm advising the patient to call back if their symptoms worsen. And then here we put the reason that the patient actually had a telephone consultation in the first place. So was it for pain? Was it for swelling, bleeding, trauma, soft tissue pathology, other, or routine treatment? So I'm going to say that mine was for pain. And then when I click OK, I have completed my triage assessment. So when I click TC on this, what you will see is a much shortened version of an FP17. So this is the initial triage FP17. So you'll see that it's got the performer there, it's got the contract number there, and we've also got on here face-to-face appointment arranged with the practice, but patient failed to attend. So it is really important that you do an initial assessment for everybody you speak to over the phone. It's really, really important that you do that, because if the patient then fails to attend an appointment in the practice, you can send this off, and this then goes towards your activity, which is being monitored this year. Okay, so I'm just going to send claim on that one. And you'll notice that that then disappears from there, and that patient has completed that initial triage. Okay, so if we just carry on from there. So you can see here the triage code there, the initial assessment form there. Do I need to fill out an initial assessment even when the patient is coming into the practice? It is best practice that you do this, and I have just probably about half an hour ago just had this confirmed by the Dental Practice Board. If you are doing an initial assessment which requires you speaking to a patient on the telephone, it is important that you do that initial assessment, even if you are asking that patient to come back for a separate appointment. Because if that patient then fails to attend that separate appointment, you can still send off your initial assessment and it will still go towards your activity. Okay, if you don't record that initial assessment, you will have nothing to say what time you did it, when you did it. You would have to go through the whole rigmarole of doing it, backdating it. So it is much easier to do it when you're actually on the phone to the patient. You can change the triage when the patient comes in using the radio button, so go between initial and treatment, but there is absolutely no reason why you cannot chart 2 triages, one for initial, one for treatment, on the same course of treatment. And I have had that confirmed by the BSA, as I said, about half an hour ago, so it will not cause rejections for you. Okay, if you do see a response come back that is an @312 response, no significant treatment on an EDI claim, what that means is that you have added something to that initial assessment. So you'll remember I said, if you want to write notes, double click on the triage code and write your clinical notes in there, or alternatively, use an auto note and send it straight into the history. You could, if you wanted to, make a private course of treatment for that, but there is no requirement for you to do that as long as you either write the notes where I showed you on the clinical record of the triage form, or in an auto note that is sent straight to history. But if you do get this response, it's because you've added something to an initial triage. Okay, so the in-treatment triage used to send the patient's COVID status to the board. So when you do an in-treatment triage and you put additional banded treatment on that, it will send that patient's risk status to the board. So it's perfectly feasible that initially you may have spoken to a patient who was awaiting test results, and then you see them 10 days later, they've had, or 5 days later, 7 days later, they've had their test results, they're negative. So you would have a different status, and that's perfectly acceptable to have a different status for your patient during the initial assessment and then during the triage in treatment assessment. Okay, now this one is really, really important. Do I still need to capture the risk assessment before the patient attends for an appointment? Absolutely, yes, you do. Okay, the triage assessment that is going to the board is not a replacement for your COVID-19 risk assessment. That is required by for any patient before they are seen in the practice. It's for your own and for your patient's safety. Details about the risk that a patient poses due to their COVID-19 status must be recorded in the patient's record. Okay, so I'm just now going to pop back into Exact and show you the in treatment. Okay, so I have a patient here, and if I mark that patient as in, what we'll see when we go to that patient is that I did an initial triage for them yesterday. You'll notice that I've also got an assessment and advice on here, and I'm going to do what I believe is going to be a pulp extirpation because the patient has told me what is wrong with them. I believe that I'm going to do a pulp extirpation on this patient. I've also got my triage here, which is my my triage for in treatment. Okay, so I planned this out just like I would any normal course of treatment. I've got my initial one that I did here yesterday, which has been ticked. Okay, and then I've also got my second appointment on here with my assessment and advice, my pulp extirpation, and my separate in treatment triage here. You'll notice that if the patient pays for treatment, that it will put the cost on there for the patient, because essentially they are having treatment, and if they are a fee-paying patient, then they do need to pay for that treatment. Okay, again, you can write any clinical notes in here because you are doing an in-treatment assessment, so it is going to fire off the larger FP17, the full-size FP17. So any notes that you put in here will not cause rejections. So I'm just going to put a little note in here. Okay, so you can see, you can just put a note in there. When I tick appointment 2, if I double click onto here, I've got somewhere where I can edit the triage assessment. And in here, you can see that we've now gone to in-treatment assessment. Okay, so I can either change this one here, okay, to today's date and today's time, or I can, sorry, if I tick that again, double click onto this. Okay, that's interesting. I can change the date and the time on here, and then I can also put in the different reason why the patient is here. Okay, so I can say that the patient is symptom-free, click OK, and then when I TC this, what we will then see is the larger FP17, and we've got the triage here. So we've got the triage here. I didn't change the date or time, but you can see that we've clearly got 2 bits of information that is going to go down to the practice board. At the moment, they're both the same, but they could be different if the patients are coming in at a different time. Okay, so if I send that claim, that will then go off. There we are, that's it. That will then go off to the board, and you'll see that that patient's FP17 will go down to the board as any normal one would. Now, if you have a patient that you are, I'm just going to mark this one in. So I'm marking this patient in, and I'm going to do an initial assessment on this patient. So I'm going to do what I would normally do. I'm just going to put him in my chair like so. And I'm then going to do my triage assessment here. Okay. And this is going to be my initial triage. So I will go through my telephone call with the patient, and I will do my initial triage. When I tick this, it asks me to fill out the triage data here. So if I fill out the triage data, like I normally would, let's say that this is, okay, advice given, and I'm going to get this patient back because they've got a swelling. Okay, so I've done my initial, and I'm just going to charge that through like so. But what I want to do then is I want to add another appointment for this patient to come back. So I'm just going to right click, add an appointment in here, and I'm going to say that this patient is just coming back for an assessment and advice. I'm not sure what treatment I need to do for them at the moment, so I'm just going to put them on for an assessment and advice. So I'm just going to go to my all list here, and 47, there we go, assessment and advice there. And that is what my patient is actually going to come back for. So when they come back, I can then, if I want to, chart another triage appointment, or I can do it here if I want to, and I've then got my treatment plan laid out for that patient. If that patient then fails to attend that appointment, what I'm then able to do is TC this treatment. Actually, I need to take that one off. Sorry, I need to take that one off before I can TC it. TC this treatment. I'm doing exactly what I told you guys not to do, so I do apologise. I need to take all of that off because it won't let me send the initial assessment unless I actually take off what they didn't come for. So when I do this, I then have the option, apologies for that, I then have the option to actually say that they didn't attend their face-to-face appointment with me. And then I can send the claim, and I can claim my time that I spent with that patient. Okay, If I do an initial assessment for a patient and the patient does come in for their treatment, then that particular time will not be used. Sorry, it won't be counted towards your activity because the patient did actually attend the appointment. However, if the patient doesn't attend their appointment, it's important that the board knows that you did spend time doing triage with that patient. So that's why you would send off that initial triage form. So that's why it's important when you do a telephone consultation with a patient that you actually do that telephone triage form for them at the end of that appointment, because you are then able to claim that if the patient doesn't turn up for their face-to-face appointment. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to my PowerPoint presentation. So we have concluded the part about the NHS triage assessments, but we did talk a little bit about the COVID risk assessment. And the COVID risk assessment for your patients, as I said, is it's absolutely vital that you do this. And one of the ways that you can do this is by using Patient Portal. So if you're not familiar with Patient Portal, then this is how it works. So basically, patients can fill out their details online on their own device before they actually come to the practice. So it makes it much simpler, much safer, and much easier for the practices if patients do those things by using the Patient Portal. These are just some stats on how useful it is. So you can see here that it's showing the amount of forms that were filled out. So you can see that we did have a bit of a dip in May because obviously less patients were being seen. But then as we go up again, we can see that this is slowly, steadily climbing, and that 38% of forms were completed when the practice was actually closed. So, you know, time that would be taken, so 38% of the time would be taken in a practice with a patient turning up and them having to fill out something either on a CliniPad or on a piece of paper. 38% of that time is actually saved because patients are doing that before they come to the practice, even when the practice is closed. And then an additional 17% of those forms are filled out before 10 a.m. in the morning. So the return rate is very, very good at the moment. So the COVID triage questionnaire it does ask them about whether they've had a diagnosis, are they waiting for COVID-19 test results, have they travelled internationally in the last 14 days, have they had contact with someone who has a confirmed diagnosis or has been in isolation with a suspected case, and do they have any of the following symptoms: fever, dry continuous cough, changes of smell. So all of those symptoms that we know about. And I'm pretty sure I can say with some conviction that there will be a new part added to that form in the fullness of time, which talks about vaccinations. As we've now got a live vaccine going on, I'm pretty sure that that will be added to that form in the not too distant future. So all of this can be done, and your patients can be triaged through this, because immediately the patient fills this out, it is visible to the practice in the software. So it's very, very simple and very, very easy for you to see a patient's COVID status. And if they do register that they have had any of these things, like a confirmed diagnosis, or they've travelled internationally, or they've been in contact with someone, it will flag that to you on Exact. So just some more statistics for you. In the last 30 days, 2.8 million patient forms have been completed remotely using Patient Portal. So it's not something that people are not using. And 600,000 of those forms were the COVID-19 triage questionnaires. So if you want to know anything more about Patient Portal, then our teams are ready to answer any questions that you may have. And it just remains for me to say thank you very much for joining the webinar. I hope you found it useful. And if you have any questions, then please don't hesitate to contact Software of Excellence. Thank you very much.